Alright guys, so global chaos is back on the menu. We are getting flooded with crazy news and let's talk about it. It's back to doom and gloom again. We have Ukraine losing even more support, this time from the EU. Europe themselves, they are having a bigger economic crisis. Plus a massive shipping disaster it's building in the Middle East. Now if you think inflation is over, if you think things can't escalate even further, this is a wake-up call. And the first reality check is for the Eurozone economy. In our lead story today, Eurozone slump deepens with recession odds notably high. The December PMI has fallen down to 47, below estimates. This collapse is worse than we all thought. Both the manufacturing and services PMI they have stayed in a contraction zone for far too long. Economists are predicting a contraction in Q4 GDP of at least 0.1%. That means the EU is likely already in a recession. They probably just aren't declaring it yet. So if you're Ukraine, you're probably sweating buckets right now. If you think getting money is hard, just wait until Brussels they declare a recession. That's why I'm very confident that the Russian reserves will be used to fund Ukraine sooner or later. Because the EU simply can't squeeze their economies further. The end of the road is coming. Everything we've been talking about over the past 12 months is now playing out in real time. The big concern here is how the Eurozone industries can ever recover. Their manufacturing base is running to China, running all the way to the US, and those are the big winners of Europe's deindustrialization. And here's how bad the picture truly is. Industrial production has collapsed to its lowest level since the 2020 lockdowns. That's how horrifying things are. Ever since they decoupled from cheap Russian energy back in 2022, industrial production has been dropping month after month. Europe's dilemma just got worse, right? They know higher interest rates are destroying their industries, but can they lower it? That's the $1 trillion question today, because it seems they are in a worse position than even the United States. The Federal Reserve has already signaled they are going to cut rates, but the ECB can't do the same because the inflation fight is not going well. We can see inflation drag well into 2025 without reaching the promised land of 2%, and this is without the ECB slashing interest rates. If they cut now, they'll be cutting in an environment of collapsing global demand. Winter is coming and Russia still has their hand on the global energy supply, right? In other words, the EU is trapped. They are screwed. Traders are betting that the ECB will be cutting rates by 150 basis points in 2024. But it's not because the inflation fight is done. It is not over, but likely because the Eurozone will be in recession. The ECB will be forced to drop rates or the economy will be 6 feet under. Remember, the compulsion of central banks today is to cut rates when there's a crisis. The only way to fight deflation is through inflation. So you would think that the EU should play their cards better, right? Now is the time to defend their economy and not make things worse. But Dr. Doom here has bad news to report. A few days ago, Putin made a speech vowing ultimate victory, and that has spooked out the EU to the point they are about to make a very big mistake. They are making another miscalculation which will drag the chaos out even further. The Eurozone has officially agreed to open membership talks for Ukraine to join the EU. Now, this is a big development that's edging Ukraine closer and closer towards joining the Eurozone. The repercussions are huge and the agenda is quite shady. Firstly, we must recall what Russia said when they vowed final victory. Putin vowed to keep fighting until Moscow secures three big terms, and the one in question is Ukraine's neutrality. If Ukraine joins the EU, the next step is NATO, and this conflict will never end. In fact, this will escalate things to a whole new level. Remember what NATO's Article 5 states, right? If one member gets attacked, the rest of the alliance is treaty bound to intervene. It's considered an attack against all. And that's why if you look under the surface, this might be a plan to drag the Americans back into the fight. The US is in a funding deadlock with Congress pushing the border policy. No aid is going to come this year, so the EU is just freaking out. I believe the United States will push back against that. They know how deadly the stakes are, and if Ukraine really joins the EU before the war is over, they might have to really put boots on the ground. The alliance will be forced to give a military response. And once again, this is why the EU-Russia relations, they are more or less forever broken. Just look at the situation here, guys. They are fast-tracking Ukraine into NATO. They are moving to use the frozen reserves, and more sanctions are coming from Moscow once again. Europe has agreed on yet another package of sanctions on Russia, and this time is targeting Russian diamonds. So here's the situation. In March, Russian diamonds size a carat or bigger will be banned from the G7 countries. This will extend to half a carat by September 2024. So if you're shopping for a diamond ring, sorry guys, inflation is coming for you. But in all seriousness, it won't have any effect. It's like trying to drain the ocean with a bucket. Diamond revenues are less than $4 billion a year for Russia. And if diamonds can't flow to the West, they'll just end up in China. So this at best is an act of desperation to choke whatever revenue is left on the table. And at the end of the day, the big losers are going to be the consumer once again. But even within the EU itself, there's more chaos happening. Hungary has vetoed the aid to Ukraine after the agreement on the membership talks. I think Orban can see the big danger of extending the borders of the EU all the way to Russia's doorstep. If they incorporate Ukraine and Moldova into the Union, then almost all of Russia's borders will be surrounded by EU countries. Now, I understand Russia is the EU's mortal enemy, but even so, you need to listen to their concerns as well. If you avoid these, then there's no path towards a resolution. But let's talk about the EU aid to Ukraine being blocked. This is a 50 billion euro package that requires all 27 members to back it. Since Hungary has voted no, Ukraine won't be getting the aid. And if you lump this together with America's missing $60 billion, it's not a good look for Zelensky. America is still grappling with the border issue, and now Hungary has thrown a big spanner into the works. The EU has been withholding $30 billion of funding from Hungary since last year. It's like a financial sanction to force Hungary to obey the bloc. If we ask you to jump, you have to ask how high. But if you listen to Orban, he's getting sick and tired of the EU, and he said this under no uncertain terms. Hungary doesn't want to be the pupil of another power. It wants to be its own master. We need to be radical to succeed, which is exactly what Orban has been doing. They are one of the last EU members to still buy lots of Russian gas to keep their inflation low, and they are building more relations with China as well when the rest of the EU is decoupling away. So you can see the bloc's frustration with Hungary. The last 3 months have been especially concerning for the Eurozone. In particular, Orban met with Putin in Beijing and blocked Ukraine's EU membership plus the aid money as well. If we were to speculate further, there are only two routes left for the EU. When it comes to the Ukraine aid, either the EU does the unthinkable and they use the frozen assets of Russia, or they have to pass the 50 billion euro bill before a recession hits next year, likely in Q1 or at the most Q2. I think we are fast approaching the end game here, and as we suspect, it has more to do with economics and politics than the actual battle itself. If all the forecasts are right and a hard landing is coming, then funding could be drying up really soon. And if that isn't enough doom and gloom for you, we need to focus on the Middle East for a bit. We've talked about how dangerous the entire region still is. This is not just a region for oil production, but it is a hub for global trade as well. Because there's still no Gaza ceasefire and the truce is broken, more chaos is erupting. I think we have said it 1,000 times by now. Until the US stops vetoing the UN resolutions, this powder keg will keep exploding. From Bloomberg, shipping giants pause Red Sea route as Houthi attacks intensify. The big boys in shipping like Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd are avoiding sailing through the Red Sea route. I mean, you can't really blame them, right? The Houthis, they've been attacking and hijacking vessels. They have even engaged a US warship, so the whole area is simply going up in flames. Pulling up the map, we can see how urgent this situation really is. The entire region is packed full of Iran and their proxies. The Red Sea is now under direct attack by the Houthis from Yemen. We have been focusing too much on the Strait of Hormuz, but the real danger now lies across the Gulf. If more ships start pulling away from the Red Sea, that means the Suez Canal crossing up north is essentially useless. The trade flows will be directed away from the region. They will be forced to make a much longer route around Africa. And this is extremely bad for supply side inflation. All our shipments might be about to heat up really soon. About 12% of global trade depends on the Suez Canal, while 5% relies on the Panama Canal. And guess what? The Panama Canal is now disrupted by droughts. When it rains, it really pours, right? And it's just bad news compounding after bad news on each other. It's not as bad as oil supply getting cut off, but we can't underestimate this. Global supply chains are starting to collapse. And let's say you were to transport something from Rotterdam in Europe all the way to Singapore in Asia. If you took the shorter route through the Suez Canal, the voyage would take 8,400 nautical miles. But because of the Red Sea attacks, you gotta divert your flows around the Cape of Good Hope. That's over 11,000 miles. The voyage has now been extended by at least 40%. That means more delays in shipment and more fuel burned in the process. If the entire Red Sea gets closed down, that is enough to break global supply chains. This will reduce trade and GDP growth around the world. So all the stuff that you bought from Amazon is going to take longer to deliver and prices will be heading up. The worst hit once again is going to be Europe. It won't be the US or China suffering that much, but EU trade to Asia will now cost more. So you're piling up extra costs on top of higher prices. Not a good idea when the global economy is slowing down. Demand for EU goods and imports will drop. The issue now is what would the United States do? What would the US Navy do, right? Will they deploy ships to defend the sea? Or will they strike the Houthis directly in Yemen? And all this should really freak us out. While we are crossing our fingers for a soft landing, the risks are starting to build up and pile up for a global crash landing. The only bright spot I can see is a nightmare for the West, and that is Russia-China's trade accelerating faster than ever. China-Russia trade has exceeded $200 billion in the first 11 months of this year. This is 12 months ahead of schedule. China's buying a ton of Russian energy while Moscow is spotting almost everything else from Beijing. This number is only going to grow as the world continues to split apart. We're now seeing the effects of all the sanctions today, right? It's really obvious to see who are the big winners and who are the big losers. The EU is expected to crash into recession, but it's quite different for Russia today. The Q3 GDP numbers are in, and it's a crazy growth of 5.5%. That's more than either the US or even China. The Russian economy isn't going to collapse tomorrow. We have to be realistic here. The sanctions aren't really working, and if the West keeps pushing their luck, they keep pushing forward, they'll be building up Russia and China at their own expense. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Will Europe crash into recession? And will the Red Sea get blocked off completely? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.